Hey everybody, this is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, and our goal every week is to inspire you with some very cool idea topic, usually related to service to others, as that is a major piece of what Rotary is all about. Our own club has its own little extra focuses of education, entrepreneurship, and innovation. And in the space of how technology can serve the business of service, we have speaking with us today, Naila Saras, who is in Los Angeles, or actually Santa Clarita, right? And member of ICANN. Now, you read her introduction on the way into this recording, and we are excited to have her learn a little bit more about her work and to begin connecting dots, because there are a lot of connections with the people on the call. So with that, I hand it over to you Naila. Welcome to our club.
Thanks, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today, especially after going through the introductions and hearing who's on the call today. My name is Naila Saras. As Rushton said, I am the VP of Global Stakeholder Engagement for the North America region at ICANN. ICANN stands for Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. And I want to talk about ICANN a little bit here today and where it fits in the broader internet ecosystem as it touches on all of our lives, especially what we've seen in the last year. And I do want to mention here that there's a lot of jargon that gets thrown around in ICANN. So if at any moment, please stop me or ask me questions during the Q&A period, because I don't want to leave some of things mystified here. So going back to the beginning, where this whole thing ICANN started from, this seems like a long time ago, but back in the 90s, there was with the internet with the growth of the internet, there was a recognition that we needed a home to house the different internet functions that were housed at that point in different places. So a place to house the internet. This is during the Clinton administration, so late 90s. And then also grow it with the recognition that it was a resource now that was serving multiple sectors, certainly growing, and something that needed to be developed. So up until then, it was basically the person that was doing the functions that now reside under the main pillars of what ICANN does was Mr. John Postel here on the left. And he was doing what we call the IANA, the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority functions, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. And the legend has it, I haven't seen it, he did all the work that he did was recorded on a little notebook that he put in his shirt pocket. And so obviously that work where he kept everything in his head and in his notebook needed to be formalized and institutionalized, if you will. Also with here in the beginning slide, I have another picture of people that you may recognize. We have on the right here, Mr. Vince Cerf and Mr. Steve Crocker, also with John Postel. Steve Crocker and Vince Cerf were very instrumental in the earlier days of creating the backbone of what became the internet today. So here's a little depiction of ARPANET and how it evolved in the 60s, 70s to what we know as the internet today. And two of those gentlemen happened to be the chair of the ICANN board at different times. So I think it was Vince Cerf in the early 2000s. And then Steve Crocker was our chairman sometime, I think, between 2015 to about 2018. So very influential people here, also in ICANN. So I said, what is this ICANN? Why did it need to be created? And what does it do? So it's for the coordination of what we call three very important elements that allow the internet to be what it is today. Those three pillars are the protocol parameters, names, and numbers. Protocol parameters have to do with how the internet functions. And most of us day to day, certainly my son over there screaming and playing Minecraft doesn't know anything about protocol parameters. These are things that are used by by engineers and developers on the internet that make sure that the different applications on the internet are talking to each other. An example of protocol parameter, for example, is a registry called port numbers. Every time your computer goes out on the internet to look up something, it's going through what we call port number 80, which allows it to access the internet. So there's a registry within ICANN called a protocol parameters registry, which has these different registries of what the different numbers are dedicated for. Again, it's something that most of us don't see, but it's very important to have one authoritative source of those registries and agreed upon numbers. The second column, names, is perhaps what ICANN is most known for. It's the operation of domain names. ICANN works at the top level of that. If you think of domain names structure as a tree, ICANN operates at the top. The tree is something like this. If you go, for example, if you're a Gmail user, you probably access your Gmail at gmail.com, or it could be gmail.google.com. At the top of the tree is .com, and then under that tree is gmail.com. So that's why we think of the DNS, or the domain name system, as a tree. And ICANN operates at the top of that tree. So anything at the top level, .com, .org, .info, .us, .it for Italy, we had the gentleman talk about DNIC, who runs .de for Germany. Those are all top level domains. And that's where ICANN's work is clustered, right here at the top level. And then the third pillar is the numbers. These are the Internet Protocol, or the IP numbers, the IP address numbers. So there's two versions. There's IPv4 and IPv6. And then there's also something called autonomous system numbers. ICANN is the place that houses those, the bulk of those numbers. And then there's policies that allow it to delegate these numbers to what's called regional internet registries. And then from there, the regional internet registries also delegated to their customers and their users. So an ISP, somebody here, I heard they said that they are involved with an ISP. They're probably a customer of something called RIPE NCC, which is the regional internet registry in charge of assigning internet IP address numbers for the Europe region. For the US, it's called ARIN. So ICANN works with these organizations around the world to give IP addresses, and then they work with their customers and internet service providers and local internet providers to provide those IP address numbers. I hope that's, that is clear. Now, with that in mind, these three things that ICANN does, that drives what the ICANN mission is. And it's all about unique names and numbers. Because if you think about it, in order to get anywhere on the internet, you have to be assured that you're accessing something unique. When I'm going to google.com, I'm only going to something that's operated by the Google Corporation as google.com. You can think of it as it's addressing an envelope. So when we hand out those unique IP addresses, when you send an envelope for somebody as a letter, you want to be sure that who you're sending it to is exactly the person who's intended to receive it. And the same thing goes with any two machines that need to talk on the internet, being computers or mobile phones, or your refrigerator telling you what groceries you still need to get, etc. So that's the mechanism used to do that communication is called IP addresses. Those IP addresses are quite hard to remember and rattle off the top of your head. And that's where then the domain name system comes in place, because the domain name system is basically a translation from the IP addresses to the names that we recognize. So even though we all know and go to www.google.com, there is an IP address behind it that it's actually going to. So the domain name system is the translation from the names to the numbers. Okay, so then within that, so you've got the things that ICANN is responsible for. Why it's responsible for that is to maintain those that uniqueness, that no two IP addresses are the same IP address is allocated to two different entities. So then that's where ICANN's work here is to ensure that there's a stable and a secure operation that keeps these unique identifiers unique, which is the intended purpose for them. So what ICANN does then to maintain that, it's in charge of allocating the second pillar I talked about earlier, which is the domain names. So for somebody like the lady here we have that's involved with the IT, there has to be an organization. So where ICANN touches on the IT, for example, is ICANN is the organization that recognizes who the operator of that IT is going to be. So there's an organization within Italy that says, we want to run that IT. This is our national top level domain for Italy. And so they present themselves as the organization that will run that IT. ICANN then recognizes that this is the organization that is operates that IT. And then ICANN works with the organization that runs that IT to put the information from that IT into what's known as the DNS root zone, so that anyone that's going to an IT domain name can access that domain name. Then in addition to that, as you can imagine, once you get into allocating domain names and who runs them, there's policies that go with how those domain names are run. Domain names for countries are run differently than domain names that are more than what we call the generic domain names. So for generic.com is, for example, an example of a generic one, or .org is another example of a generic one. So ICANN coordinates the policy work of how these top-level domains are run. It also facilitates the coordination of what we call the operation and evolution of a DNS root server system. So all of us, when we're accessing domain names, we're using the root server system that basically is the directory that sends us to the right places that we need to go to. And that coordination happens inside ICANN. I talked earlier also about the allocation of IP address numbers to these regional internet registries. That's also happening as part of ICANN. And then ICANN is doing any of this work alone. There's also multiple organizations around the world that organize this work. And that's important here for us to recognize, because that's bodies like the ITU, International Telecommunications Union. There's also another organization called the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, etc. So there's multiple organizations around the world that do that we need to coordinate with, so that this again remains a secure and stable resource. As it carries its mission, ICANN's goals, and that are constantly, we are reminded of as staff, and we're reminded of as the wider community that we impact with our work. I got it, thank you, that's perfect. We maintain the security, stability of the internet, doing this in an open and transparent manner, and that we are responsible and efficient with the fiscal responsibility that we are trusted with. The way this works inside ICANN is it's not just the staff alone. There's three pillars. There's the organization itself, which I belong to. That's the staff. There's about 350 of us. There's the board of directors that does what you all expect the board of directors does. And then there's also the community. And the community is really essential and extremely the blood and the life of why this organization works. They are the ones that work on these policies that then become sent to the board to implement, to approve, and the organization to implement. I wanted to give you here an example of a couple of these things that the community works on. And I was so glad about during the introductions that I know there are people here that will be impacted by this and could possibly be volunteers here. One of the things that happened, I would say, around the early 2000s is there was a recognition that the internet, as it was growing, it was also shutting off other people of the other parts of the world that did not necessarily use the Latin script. So those of us who use English, Italian, Spanish, German, etc., we're all using the same Latin-based script. And so accessing the internet is relatively easy for us because it's using those scripts that the internet was originally developed in. But if I put my Arabic hat on as an Arabic speaker, I do right to left and completely different characters to do anything in Arabic. And so that was not available. That, there was no domain name that I could type in Arabic to access my own internet in my own language. And so the internationalized domain names is something that became an extreme need that the world recognized. And that's when two things happened. One is the beginning of the introduction of internationalized domain names in the internet. So instead of accessing google.com, I can go to something, .ps as a Palestinian, which is .Palestine, and then I can access a domain name in my own language. To do that, we needed to develop rules for how to, what characters are acceptable for the domain name system to use to create these domain names. And that's when we had what we call expert panels from each community that set up themselves to provide these domain rules. So Arabic, for example, is one where we have a community that says, here are the Arabic letters that are okay to use in creating a domain name, Ethiopian, Thai, etc. And then what that then facilitates is the creation of these top-level domains in different languages. This is the map as it stands now. We have 62 of those country code top-level domains. For example, the folks that we have today from Germany and Italy, they have that IT, right, for their country code. But then also there are countries whose native language or script is not an ASCII-based script. And that's where an equivalent in their own language or script is created. So for example, I will point to the one that's right here, the .eg for Misr, and that's the equivalent in Arabic. So if you actually go, you can access a domain name that's, instead of accessing .eg, they operate other domain names that are Arabic. So you can have like Ministry of Communications .Egypt. That's all in Arabic. And I'm pointing right to left because it really would be right to left. This is only a map of where the country codes, there's 62 of them that are country codes. Please remember that there's also others that are generic generic names that are also in other languages. So these are the examples I wanted to give. There's a lot that goes on inside ICANN as an organization. As I said, the reason why this organization works is because it's international and because it relies on volunteers around the world to bring that work into ICANN, develop policies and within the ICANN structures. And so my call for you here is, if this is intriguing, if this is anything that you see yourself involved in, there's offices around the world, and I will make sure that my contact information is provided, so you can please reach out to me, get in touch with me, so we can connect you with the right work group or organization, part of the organization that you might be interested in. So I'll stop here, Rushton, and I think I don't know how far after the 12 minutes I am. My apologies. I had a timer and then I forgot to hit it.
That's all right. That's all right. Go ahead and stop sharing your screen if you would. I'd like to introduce the people who are on the recording. And as I call your name, please wave. First of all, in my order, we're going to start with Nick in British Columbia, our club secretary. There's me, hello, in San Jose, California. Valerie Sun, joining us from Los Angeles. Our speaker, Naila Saras. The club Paella Master, Shags Shagrin in Walnut Creek, California. In Italy, Angelica Murata. All right, good to have Italy in the house. Then we have 3 members in 2 windows from Germany. We have Jens, who gives us the party reaction there, as well as Henri and Manouche. And so it is good to have Germany represented as well. And then, as I like to say, our club's favorite Georgian, Tanya in Atlanta, and also the fearless leader of the programs team. Now, with that, we always like to start peppering our speakers with some questions, and we're going to start with a question from Italy. Angelica, if you would lead us off.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, first I wanted to thank Naila for this great presentation and for explaining this complex word of the domains. And yeah, so as you know, ICANN has been so useful in, for example, providing recommendations for regulations in Europe, such as the GDPR. And so, yeah, and I've been dealing with this a lot, and then I've been looking at the recommendation provided by ICANN. So I wanted to know what are the main compliance recommendations for example, non-mandatory regulations, because as you mentioned, ICANN is so global and then has to deal with a lot of registries around the world. And then if there are some specific recommendations for registries to comply with regulations in general.
Mhm. Wow, Angelica, you started with a very complex one.
Yeah, it's a very specific question, I know.
Yeah, no, this is excellent. Thank you so much for attending, and I'm so thrilled to that you're on this presentation. I really didn't expect that many people to be connected to ICANN. Your question is great. The GDPR, as you can imagine, this has been a hot topic for ICANN in the last, how long has it been? Like 2-3 years now. We've been dealing with GDPR. I don't know if you're asking at the CCTLD level or at the generic level. I'm not going. I can very much. What I'm going to do is I'm going to provide you with information of who to talk to in ICANN about this. Because as you well know, the rules that or the policies that ICANN employs when it comes to CCTLDs are completely different than generic top-level domains. And for everybody here, just to probably left that out during the talk, is it's very important that country codes are operated, in country according to the rules and regulations of the local country, the local jurisdiction. So there has to be it's a very fine rule for ICANN when it comes to how, what it can say or do about country codes. GDPR, nonetheless, that does touch on all European citizens, regardless of where they are. And so, Angelica, if you don't mind, I would like to, I'm going to connect you with my colleague in the global, in the team, in the government engagement team called Elena. And I think Elena
would be great
to answer that. Yeah. Have you dealt with Elena?
Sorry?
Have you dealt with Elena? Do you know that? Are you familiar?
No, I don't, because I don't deal with ICANN directly. There's a department that deals with international relations with ICANN, and I only deal with compliance part. So yeah, I run the compliance programs for GDPR, ISO 27001, and other regulations for the registry.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I've always been so interested in how this international global organization works. So yeah, that would be great.
Absolutely, yes. I will have Elena get in touch with you on that. I have to ask you, Angelica, sorry, before you go, are you, do you work with Giovanni Seppia, or are you familiar with him?
No. Yeah, because it's a big registry, and then we are included in the National Research Council, and then we are so spread across the different departments. But yeah, we'll probably, I don't know, talk about this in a different settings.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I also have a question. Thank you for your presentation today. I'm excited to learn about this, because I deal with it from in my professional life, from dealing with cloud-based applications and moving companies onto the cloud and everything that has to do with that. But I'm as a personal note, I'm much more fascinated by the idea of how we're evolving in the politics of it and everything. And so I'm curious today if do you face more pressure with is there pressure that you receive? Because I noted in your summary slide that you had regional offices, but also engagement offices and partnership offices. And I was curious how all of that works with the very differing views of how we treat internet between the European Union, between the United States and then places like China as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Nick. There is that's That's really a very important thing to mention here, because you're absolutely right. The pressures is to keep this, as one internet, right? Because there is so much call for exactly what I think earlier we talked about, to balkanize the internet or separate it, right? Or have the Chinese running their own internet with their okay things, the way they want to run their internet, or the Russians run the internet the way they want to run the internet. And so having this is what ICANN has dealt with from day one, is to make sure that it does not become or be perceived as a US organization, as a North American organization only. And that's why it's important that they've set up that we have these engagement teams. So just like I look after the North America region, I have 5 or 6 other colleagues that look after other regions. So APAC is a big one, Europe, Eastern Europe. And so we all work together to make sure that we're all aware of what each other are doing. There's a lot of legislation popping up around the world that, again, is about how to, who is, and GDPR and information on the internet. And so it's really important that we're coordinating. So yeah, that's one I would, if I can say anything, that's one of the main challenges of ICANN, is how do we keep this, one internet, one world, one internet, but everyone connected and hopefully playing, well together. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.
Excellent. I'll toss out a last question before we finish up the recording, and then pepper you with more questions, because we do that. And in doing that, I'd like to say that there's some real opportunities in naming. For example, if you want to come to our club, you can come to Rotary.cool, which I think is pretty awesome, right? But when I think about the idea of a group of people essentially sitting down and saying, can .cool be a part of how the system works? And that is ICANN, right? That in determining those things. What I'm curious about, are there things that were suggested and were perhaps initially thought, well, that's a good idea, and then somebody came up with an idea and said, we might end up with this issue, and then it was rejected? And do you have any stories for us on that front?
Oh, that's a good one. Okay, so I didn't realize you guys were Rotary.cool. So in 2012 is the most recent window of having these new extensions added, because as the internet was created, there was about 20 or so that popped up from 1998 when ICANN was created until about 2012. So we only had like COM, org, info, etc. that were set up, and those were the generics. But then there was always around 300 that are the country codes, the IT, DE, PS, US, etc. And then there was a recognition that everything, all the good names under .com are taken, whether you believe it or not. So then there was an ask for we need more top-level domains, and that's when Cool and a bunch of other domain names, around 1,200 of them, were created. There's a number of them that were created since then that were almost like you think of as defensive registrations. So let's say an organization said, we need to protect our name so that nobody else registers it. I'm just going to give an example. I'm not really saying this is what happened. Let's say .Ford wanted to make sure that nobody else got .Ford and did anything that .Ford would not approve of. So then .Ford would have, they registered their top-level domain as a top-level domain. I think since then, it wasn't that they recognized that it's not cool or anything like that, or that there was an issue. Those brands that registered a top-level domain as a defensive mechanism perhaps recognized we don't need to do that. There was, and this is not, I'm not saying anything that isn't public here, there was a big, during this round where new top-level domains were added, there was a big issue that popped up during this round between Amazon, the region, and Amazon, the company. Because as you can imagine, that Amazon, the company, wanted a top-level domain called .amazon. And then the objection came from Amazon, the region, in Brazil and Bolivia, etc., where they said, wait a minute, this is a region, and if anyone is going to operate a region, it will be us. So these are the fights that typically pop up, is when things, when there's that dispute between, is this recognizing just a label, or is this recognizing a name of a region that other people would be interested in? And then there's many dispute mechanisms within how to apply for these domain names and who prevails that are applied in this environment. There's a very, very long process to work on these disputes. But that's one of the ones that we got involved in that I thought were pretty interesting is the, is it Amazon the region or is it Amazon the company? There's a recognition that in general, these top-level domains are very, something that's recognized and very quickly jumped on here in North America. And it's something that we, as more rounds of having more top-level domains are introduced, we need, other parts of the world to also join in. And not just creating these top-level domains, but also having registrars. So those people that are actually registering domain names under those top-level domains to also exist around the world. So that's the difficulty is, getting, more people involved in the business aspect of it and registering domain names and bringing on more people.
Excellent. All right. Well, we'll wind things down. I'll hand it back to you for a final word in just a minute. But for all of you who are visiting, please, first of all, feel free to come back anytime. Rotary.cool. All right, that's us. And it is an easy way to make up a miss if you are working to keep 100% attendance. Why would anyone do that? In order to be inspired to service on a regular basis. That's exactly why. So let us know you were here. Fill out our attendance form, and that will generate an email that you can pass along to your club secretary for the miss to be made up. Additionally, we have our forum, Discuss, DISQUS, at the bottom of the page, and we hope that you will engage in the conversation. What did you think of this program? What did you think of other elements of our meeting? Respond to what people have said. The goal is to inspire each other, to share ideas, and to have that be part of our general goal as Rotarians to make the world a better place. So with that, Naila, I will hand it back to you for a final word.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm really thrilled to have done this. If I can, as a person, if I can ask you to do anything, is to please get involved. Nick, your expertise are much needed. Angelica, the person, Jens, please, Shags, anyone on this call, please. I heard, Valerie, I heard you say at the beginning, special needs is who you work with, special education. There's a need for all of you to be involved in ICANN. If any of the work that we do is something you're interested in, please let me know. I will find a way to pass on my contact information to Rushton. I'm not sure that I've done that. I don't mind for it to be shared. This will only work if we're all involved. So if any of this is interesting to you, please join us.
Excellent. Thank you, Naila. And everyone, we will see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.